The Great Hall of the Northfang Pack had never been this quiet. Every year, on the night of the gathering moon, wolves from 12 packs came to the stronghold of Alpha King Draven Ashcroft to prove their strength before him. Warriors shifted into wolves as large as horses. Their coats shone black, silver, and iron gray under the torchlight. The king watched from his dark stone throne with the calm, tired look of a man who had seen this display 1,000 times before and expected nothing new. Then it was Wren Calloway's turn. She stood at the back of the line, small and plain, wearing a simple gray dress with no jewels and no crest. She belonged to Hollowmere, the smallest and weakest pack in the Alliance, a quiet farming community that paid its yearly tribute in grain and herbs instead of gold or soldiers. Whispers followed her the moment she stepped forward. "That's the runt," someone murmured. "She can barely shift at all," said another. Why did Hollowmere even bother sending her? Wren heard every word, but she kept her chin lifted and her hands steady at her sides. Inside, her heart pounded so hard she feared everyone in the hall could hear it too. "Hollowmere," the king said, and there was already a note of boredom in his deep voice. "Show us what you have." Wren closed her eyes and reached inside herself for the wolf that lived there. It came slowly, painfully, folding her small body into an even smaller shape. Her fur was a dull, plain brown. Her legs were thin and shaking. A ripple of laughter spread across the hall, quiet at first, then louder. Draven did not laugh. He only looked at her, the way a man looks at something he has already decided is not worth remembering. "A pack that sends this creature to my gathering insults my throne more than if they had sent no one at all," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the words cut deeper. "Take her back to the kennels with the pups. Perhaps she will grow into something useful there." The laughter grew louder. Wren shifted back into her human form, dressed quickly, and walked out of the hall with her back straight, and her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She did not look at the throne again, not even once, though she felt the king's gaze follow her all the way to the door. That night, alone in the small room she had been given near the kennels, Wren sat by the window and looked out at the stars. She thought about her mother, who had died 3 winters ago, and the promise she had made to her before the end. "Stay small, Wren," her mother had whispered, holding her hand tightly. "Stay hidden, no matter what they say to you, no matter how they laugh. Never let them see what you truly are. If they knew, they would not laugh. They would hunt you, and they would not stop until you were gone, just like the others before you." Wren had grown up believing those words, the way other children believed in bedtime stories. Her mother had taught her, from the time she was very young, how to hold her wolf back, how to shrink it down, how to make herself appear weak, even when something powerful stirred beneath her skin, waiting. It had worked for 22 years. The laughter in the hall that night, painful as it was, meant she was still safe. Nobody suspected what she truly carried inside her. She should have known that the peace would not last. Rogue wolves struck the stronghold walls a little past midnight. These were wolves who followed no pack and obeyed no law. Wolves who took what they wanted and answered to no one. They came for the king himself. Somewhere within the Alliance, someone had sold information about the castle's weakest points to an old enemy of the Ashcroft bloodline, a rival family that had waited 3 generations for a chance like this. The attack came fast and brutal. Guards fell one after another. The protective wards around the outer wall shattered under the force of the assault. By the time Draven understood how deep the betrayal ran, he found himself alone in the east corridor, his sword broken, blood soaking through his sleeve, with 4 rogue wolves closing in around him. For the first time in his long life as Alpha King, a man who had never once doubted his own strength, he understood what it felt like to be the one being hunted instead of the one hunting. Wren heard the fighting from the kennels. She felt it in her chest before her mind could make sense of it. A strange and powerful pull toward the very man who had humiliated her only hours earlier. She told herself she should stay where she was. She told herself the king's fate was not her concern, that Hollowmere owed him nothing more than grain and quiet obedience. She told herself many things in those few seconds, and none of them stopped her feet from moving. She ran through the dark halls, following the sound of snarling and breaking stone, until she found him. Draven was pressed against the corridor wall, blood dripping from a wound at his side, his broken sword raised against 4 wolves that outmatched him in every way. He was still fighting, still refusing to fall, though anyone could see he had only moments left. Something inside Ren, something that had been folded small and quiet for 22 long years, something obedient to every voice that had ever told her what she was allowed to be, finally broke open. The shift that tore through her body did not resemble the timid, brown-coated creature the court had laughed at earlier that day. Her bones lengthened with a sound like thunder cracking through stone. Her shoulders widened. Fur the color of a starless midnight sky spread across a frame that grew taller and wider until it filled the corridor from wall to wall. When her eyes opened, they burned a pale, glowing gold, a color that every wolf in the 12 packs had heard about only in old stories told to frighten young pups into behaving. Stories about a bloodline so ancient and so powerful that the very first packs had gone to war rather than allow even one of them to live free. The umbral wolves, the beast that every pack feared and every pack believed had died out completely, more than 400 years ago. Draven, barely conscious against the wall, understood the truth before his mind could fully accept it. That bloodline is gone, he thought. My own grandfather signed the order that ended it. Ren did not wait for him to finish that thought. She turned on the rogue wolves with a speed that seemed to bend the air itself. 3 of them fled into the darkness the moment she bared her teeth, their courage gone in an instant. The 4th did not get the chance to run. When it was over, silence returned to the corridor, and the massive wolf standing protectively over the fallen king slowly shrank back down, painfully, into the small, plain, brown-haired woman he had mocked in front of the entire hall that very afternoon. Ren wrapped her arms around herself, trembling now that the danger had passed and the fear was finally allowed to catch up with her. She could not bring herself to look at him. "You're umbral," Draven said quietly, his voice hoarse with pain and disbelief. "That bloodline was wiped out. My own grandfather signed the order himself. My mother hid us," Ren said softly, still not meeting his eyes. "She taught me to shift small, to shift weak. She told me that if anyone ever discovered what I really was, they would finish what your grandfather started long ago." She finally lifted her gaze to his, and there was no pride in her expression, only exhaustion and an old, deep fear that had lived inside her for as long as she could remember. "I let you mock me for years, because being laughed at was always safer than being hunted." Draven pushed himself up against the wall, ignoring the sharp pain in his side, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, truly looked at her, in a way he had never once bothered to do back in the Great Hall. "I was wrong about you," he said. Each word seemed to cost him something to admit. "I was wrong about what weakness looks like. You have been stronger than every wolf in that hall for longer than I have worn this crown. And you let all of us believe otherwise, just so you could survive among us." "Are you going to finish what your grandfather started?" Ren asked. Her voice remained steady even though her hands would not stop shaking. "No," Draven said, and there was a quiet certainty in his voice that surprised even himself. "I am going to make certain that no one ever makes that mistake about you again, starting with me." He held out his hand to her. For a long moment, Ren hesitated, staring at his open palm as though it might still be some kind of trap. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. In the days that followed, word of what happened in the East Corridor spread quickly through the stronghold. Though Draven made certain the full truth of her bloodline stayed hidden from those who might still wish her harm. He gave her a place near the castle, not in the kennels, but in the quarters reserved for honored guests. He asked healers to tend to the small wounds she had taken during the fight, though she insisted, quietly, that she barely felt them at all. At first, Ren remained cautious around him. Years of hiding had taught her not to trust kindness that arrived so suddenly, especially not from someone who had laughed at her only a day before. But Draven did not give up. He sought her out in the mornings, walked with her through the quiet gardens behind the stronghold, and asked her questions about her life at Hollowmere, about her mother, about the years she had spent folding herself smaller and smaller so that no one would ever look at her twice. He listened, really listened, in a way few people ever had. Slowly, carefully, something shifted between them, something neither of them had expected on the night of the gathering moon. Not everyone welcomed the change. There were wolves within the alliance who did not trust a bloodline once thought dangerous enough to be hunted to extinction. Whispers followed Wren through the halls, different now from the ones that had followed her before, but no less painful. Some called her a threat. Others called her a trick, a spy sent by enemies of the crown to weaken the king from within. Draven silenced these rumors firmly, standing beside her in public more than once, refusing to let old fears decide her fate the way they nearly had 400 years earlier. Wren, for her part, did not hide any longer. She trained in the open courtyard where anyone could see her, allowing her wolf to grow into its full size beneath the morning sun, instead of folding it away out of fear. It was strange at first to be seen so completely after a lifetime of hiding, but with each passing week, the fear that had once gripped her chest whenever eyes turned her way began to loosen its hold, just a little more each day. By the time the next gathering moon arrived, nearly a year later, the hall that had once echoed with laughter at her expense fell silent again, but for an entirely different reason. Wren stood at the center of the floor, no longer at the back of the line, and when she shifted, there was no ripple of mockery among the crowd. There was only a heavy, respectful silence as the great, dark wolf rose before them, her golden eyes steady and calm. Draven watched from his throne, but this time, there was no boredom in his expression. There was pride, quiet and deep, and something warmer that he no longer tried to hide from those watching. The wolves who had laughed at Wren that night a year ago now knelt before her without hesitation, not because the king commanded it, though he stood ready to if it were needed, but because they had finally seen with their own eyes exactly what they had once been foolish enough to mock. They had learned, as Draven had learned in that dark corridor months before, that true strength rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly in the smallest, plainest corners of a room, folded down and hidden away, simply waiting for the moment it is finally needed. And Wren, who had spent 22 years believing that being small was the only way to stay safe, finally understood what her mother had never lived long enough to see for herself. Hiding had kept her alive. But it had taken courage, real courage, to finally be seen, and in the end, that courage had given her something hiding never could have offered. It had given her a place where she truly belonged, not in spite of what she was, but because of it.